Hi, guys. Before we jump in, have you ever wondered what really happens after you hit submit on your college applications? For the first time ever, we are hosting an admissions showdown where former admissions officers from top universities are pulling back the curtain to show you exactly how decisions are made. So join us on September 23rd, a live event where these officers go head to head deciding on which students get admitted. Seats are limited, so reserve your spot now and see what really makes them say yes. Link is in the description to register. Now, let's get back to the episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited because we have Shannon with us today. She's taught literature and writing at Yale and Ohio State. So I'm super excited to have her here with us. So, Shannon will be analyzing two Common App personal statements and breaking them down, what make them successful, how they reflect the students' identities, and what lessons you can use to strengthen your own writing. So, Shannon, before we start diving into the Common App essays, when you're reading college essays in general, what are the must have ingredients that you always look for?
I'm, first of all, always asking myself what I'm learning about the student. They're looking to use your writing to understand better who you are, where you're from, how you see the world, and arguably what you might contribute to the school. No matter what essay prompt you're responding to, no matter where it is in the application, that is the job of the application. Those are really important details, but also the things you do. What do you care about? How do you go about things? What's your personality? I use the personal statement in particular to ask myself, not only what do I learn about the student, but what does the student think it's important for me to know about them? How do they want to be understood and thought about? But I also think it's really important in terms of more particulars to understand what insight or perspective they bring to things. The personal statement in particular should be a place where you don't always have to say what your perspective is, but it needs to have one. We need to be able to start imagining the way you think about the world based on the way you tell stories about yourself and the way you talk about yourself. Do you have a more sophisticated understanding? Can you show empathy for the way that other people might think or behave or respond or care about things differently than you do? That kind of maturity about the world and how it works is important as you articulate that perspective. And for me, we're going to talk about this as we look through the specifics, but for me, a lot of what that looks like comes in what I'll call the turn, like a point in the essay where you have a realization or you start to see things differently. You're confronted with an experience or a story that challenges you in some way and that is important to you in some way. And there's some kind of growth because you're able to have that experience. Where does it go from, I used to be like this or think like this, but then because of this experience, I now think differently or see things differently. But I also think about, especially for some of the more selective schools, is the writing intriguing? Am I interested? Do they say something that wakes me up and does something different and interesting? Do they communicate a perspective or in a way that is stylistically unique or that really jumps off the page and really helps them stand apart from the stacks of essays that they have to read? It's one of the scariest pieces of advice that I give students, but sometimes taking risks can really pay off. If you don't take any risks in your application, you are going to fall into the muddle of just students. And then my last one, and again, it's a kind of scary one. Do I like the student? You forget because you're submitting your application online that there are people on the other end of that application who are going to read it. And they're reading a whole bunch of other students as well. And what is it about your application? Not only that it's going to stand out, but it's going to like win you friends at the committee table when they start making the hard discussions about who they're going to admit and who they're going to have to turn away. And if you can just connect, if there's something about you that's just like, oh, I like this kid, I like the way they do this, or I like this detail, if you can win an advocate or two from your application that really fights for you at the committee, that can be a big difference. So is there something that I'm responding positively and emotionally to? Do I like them? Do I want to meet them and talk to them? Are they intriguing in the sense that I would want to, again, have them at my college? Because again, a lot of these admissions people went to the colleges they're reading for. So in terms of big picture, that's usually what I'm looking for. Every essay kind of has its own goals and it does need to achieve them, but the student gets to set what those goals are. That's part of the what do you think we need to know about you and your experience. But those are the things that I think you need to see in basically every piece of reflective writing in your applications, but especially in your personal statement.
Okay, let's dive into the two Common App essay examples now. These students actually applied to highly selective schools as well. So, Shannon, do you want to take it away with our first one?
Here, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview so you know a little bit what's coming. I have selected two quite different essays, but both very effective essays. My goal with both of them is to show you step by step, paragraph by paragraph, talk you through what makes them effective. What are the things that it demonstrates that it's trying to do? How does it set its themes out? Let you know what the essay is about, and then how does it deliver on those things? I have chosen these two precisely because they are structured very differently. So the first essay we're going to talk about is what I would call a much more conventional personal essay structure and topic. This is a topic that, while it's unlikely that you've had this precise experience, many students will have had similar types of experiences in high school. But this is a demonstration of how you take that kind of very kind of common type of experience, how you personalize it and show how the experience is particular to you, and then how you elevate it by showing, like, again, a kind of greater sophistication, a better sense of nuance, a maturity that is going to be essential, especially given the direction the student is likely to go academically in college. The second example is it's a riskier structure, and it does things less conventionally. It is far more, I mean, I use the word flashy. It is a little bit flashy in some ways, but it goes for a bolder tone to show, again, to draw connections between different parts of their life. If you're someone who feels comfortable with the possibility of going bolder in structure, like, what does that look like? What does it communicate, and how potentially is that working? Both of these essays were extremely successful for these students. Both are attending Ivy League colleges right now. They obviously both had really strong profiles in support of their essays. So that's always also worth considering. No personal statement is perfect. There is no such thing. And even with these two highly successful essays, you have to make compromises. You have to sacrifice something in order to achieve something else. Otherwise, you'd be writing a novel and not a 650-word essay. All right. What is the value and benefit to us in protecting the dugongs? The acting governor held his practiced diplomatic smile while his communication staff snapped pictures. He'd not recognized the dugong until I'd shown him a photo, but after my impassioned appeal for dugong conservation, his question was inquisitive and genuine. We often talk about the hook, like, how do you start an essay? There are so many different ways to do this, so many different ways. This is the place where you want to intrigue your reader. In this case, it's throw them in the middle of the story. You don't know how we got here. So you can tell immediately. You have no idea where this is. You don't know why she's here. There's a lot of, like, narrative facts that you don't have, but you understand that the themes of this essay are very likely to be about conservation and kind of the political dimension of that, because that is the scene she has thrown you into. So even if you use a kind of intriguing and throw you into the story device at the beginning, it is essential that your first paragraph introduce the main tensions or conflicts that you're going to be developing over the course of your essay. But she also does a lot of character building here. You can see little conservation, save the dugongs, like, very impassioned kind of plea. She's come to speak to the governor or the acting governor as an attempt to try to sway policy and political support for this particular cause. And so you establish these kind of tensions with this dynamic immediately, even in your hook. So your hook isn't just about catching their attention. Your hook also has to be about introducing the thread that you're going to follow throughout the rest of your essay. This is going to be important as we get to the end. It also raises the central question that she is ultimately trying to answer, and it literally starts with it. What is the value and benefit to us in protecting the dugongs? So fundamentally, that is the question she starts with, and that is, to a certain extent, the question that she has challenged herself to answer by the end of the essay. Next paragraph, single sentence. These can be very effective. His question caught me off guard. It was a question I had never asked myself. So now you have a kind of new dimension to that conflict. So I had come to Guimaras Island, Philippines, to raise awareness about endangered dugongs, a relative of the manatees, and meet with local villagers and municipal government officials to formulate a sustainable protection plan. For 9 months, I had been emailing and strategizing with Dr. Shin, a marine biodiversity conservation specialist, on how to best protect these 400 kilogram dopey but ecologically valuable eyesores. Quotation marks, eyesores. All right. So right away, she is absolutely communicating the background. She's here on a conservation mission for this. I don't know if you didn't know what a dugong was at this point. She gives you some kind of charmingly vivid descriptions, the big, dopey, but like valuable, again, this idea of eyesores. But you also see some of her background, right? Her enthusiasm. She'd been doing this for 9 months. So she's on this short trip to the Philippines, but she's been preparing for nearly a year, working back and forth with a biodiversity expert in the area to work up a sustainable plan so that when she got there, she was prepared and could make it work. So you're contrasting this with what she just said in that short one, or it's technically two sentences, but that short one line paragraph above, where it's just, I had never asked myself this question. So in 9 months of preparing her pitch for why to save the dugong, she hadn't really considered this question of like, why is it valuable to the Filipino people to save the dugong? All right. So 2 planes and 1 banca boat ride later, I met with local fisher folks, as their t-shirts described them, right? So again, fisher folks in quotation marks. You can also start to see her voice, thinking about them as eyesores, calling them dopey. The kind of vocabulary you use to describe things should describe the thing you're talking about, but it should also give a sense to your style of speech and what you're like. And even the specifics of the like 2 plane rides and a 1 banca boat ride later. This is an adventure to a certain extent in a remote part of the Philippines. Like, how does she get there? These details bring this experience to life a little bit better. So surrounded by mangroves, assaulted by humidity and mosquitoes, I began my extensively researched presentation on the dangerous practice of gillnet fishing and the benefits of adapting aquaculture, right? All right, you can start to see she knows what she's talking about. So the other thing you notice is that all of a sudden, this student who your admissions reader does, because they have the rest of the application, but you don't know anything about her, you're starting to formulate this background. You're like, aha, not only is she like a conservationist, she knows this. This is probably the field she's going into. And she was like an environmental studies. Most of the majors that she applied to were in that field and thinking about the kind of policy repercussions of environment. So as you go, she has not said anything directly about it, but you can see that background building up. All right. The fisher folks nodded along politely, but their unenthusiastic response was disconcerting and unfamiliar. So you're getting a more emotional reaction. She's given you some context, but this is like you're giving a presentation in front of people that you have prepared for nearly a year, and they are being polite, but they are not engaging. And suddenly that hurts. It's disconcerting, like it's unfamiliar. And then she tells why it's unfamiliar. Back home, new environmental initiatives were greeted with enthusiasm. Thinking it was perhaps a language barrier, I dug out the illustrated brochures I'd prepared for the circumstance. Again, she's prepared. She's on top of it. She's done her research. All of these little details, she's not telling you she's a diligent, enthusiastic person, but she is coming across as a diligent, prepared, and enthusiastic person. She cares. She has done her work. She has considered contingencies. She's prepared different methods of communication. She's anticipated possible problems. And all of this is coming out as she's telling the story of what she needs. As I was rifling through my bag, an officer pulled me aside. I don't think this is a helpful message. It's too impractical. A couple of things here. You have this kind of very clearly defined before, where before she got to the Philippines, this was her approach. She'd prepared the way she prepared because she was thinking about conservation issues. You're going to discover later that is similar to the way you would pitch conservation issues in Vancouver, which is where she is from. And it's not working. So you're starting to get a greater tension, like it's not working. The other thing this does is it brings characters to life. No matter what structure you pick for your personal statement, it is almost always beneficial to create characters in your essay. You are a character. You are the only essential character in your personal statement. If you are not in your personal statement, that is a problem, and you need to reconsider everything about it. Find your characters, find your scenes, locate things in specific places at specific times and with specific people who are full people. Very often they'll need names. She doesn't give this guy a name here, but very often they need names. Use dialogue to help give them a voice. It also gives you a chance to give your own voice in dialogue when you these little kind of conversational exchanges. Like these are storytelling tricks that again inject your whole essay with a little bit more of a vibrant tone, mood, and give you opportunities to stand out. All right, so backing up a little bit. As I was rifling through my bag, an officer pulled me aside. I don't think this is a helpful message. It's too impractical. Then she asked, impractical? Quote, he elaborates. They're gillnet fishing because capture fishing doesn't provide enough for their families to eat. All right. So suddenly she is presented with a different problem that she had not anticipated in her 9 months of preparation. This is the kind of moment in the experience that really prompts and spurs that more targeted reflection. She has to be able to answer this question, or nothing she does with policy or environmental protection or conservation can possibly be effective in the Philippines. All right, I paused. They weren't fishing for profit, they were fishing for subsistence. Protecting the dugongs in the Philippines is not simply a problem of education. Families live in impoverished conditions, the infrastructure is weak, economic viability relies on resource exploitation, and thus exhausting their natural capital. All right. She is describing the problem, but the way she is describing the problem makes her sound more expert and currently more informed about the situation than she was at the time. But this is the realization. I had to realize this. Then again, I continue. Without support, these fisher folk would never be able to look beyond their immediate needs, dooming both their natural environment and the dugongs with it. This is a new problem. This isn't just the dugongs are under threat and they deserve to be preserved because they're ecologically important. It's that the problem with preserving the dugongs is a larger problem related to the support structures and the economic viability of conservation policy. I adjusted my plans for my upcoming meeting with acting governor Alejandro de Araneta. He has a name. We are back with the acting governor. With hopes of better results, I looked for government support for better research, policy, funding, and community involvement in protecting the dugongs. This is about a larger systemic problem in the Philippines. I need to talk to the people in charge. I'm going to talk to them and explain why this is so important, not only now for the dugongs, but for future economic health of the area. Despite months of meticulous planning and several last-minute changes, I still did not see his question coming, and we come back to the same question. What is the value and benefit to us in protecting the dugongs? Sweaty, even in a governor's air-conditioned office, my shoulders fell. This is a good example of showing. It's also very vivid. She's done this for 9 months, prepared for 9 months. Then she re-strategized in a hurry, after her trip to the villages. But this is not it. She's just deflated. If we don't protect them now, they won't be around forever. I persisted, but with less conviction. Then he replies, what about those struggling to put food on their tables? She replies again, conversationally. Yes, but if we continue to overexploit our resources, how will those children feed their children? Again, reframing the question. So again, you have these two characters going back and forth, articulating their concerns in this moment and about this issue. The governor remained cordial, but the conversation had become strained. Again, quote, sustainability is always a priority of our administration, but we must allocate our resources wisely. Thank you very much for coming to meet with me. Smiling again, he extended his hand as two of his assistants snapped a final picture. They couldn't find common ground. She couldn't answer the question that he needed in the most pressing way, and she got dismissed politely but succinctly. I left the governor's office, and this is where everything comes to a head. Nevertheless, his question remained with me long after I returned to eco-conscious Vancouver, to our plastic-free school cafeteria and our carefully categorized household waste system. Prioritizing environmental conservation is a luxury of stable economic circumstances and adequate government resources. Was it fair for me to ask the governor to prioritize the dugongs over his own people's well-being? This kind of more rhetorical question shows that growth. Like, I wasn't thinking about this before. And this is also the place where she starts to show, like, she has to demonstrate a more mature empathy. She cares about the dugongs, but it is also important that she understands why the people of the Philippines, both the fishermen and the governor, this is not a priority for them, that she is like a visiting Canadian who doesn't understand. And so she asks herself, was it fair of me to do this? Then her final paragraph gives her best answer. And again, we're always coming back to the question, what is the value and benefit to us in protecting the dugongs? Our meeting had not produced the results I had enthusiastically hoped for and worked toward, but it inspired a meaningful paradigm shift, right? This is a place where it's useful to tell. This is your turn. This thing that I experienced was not the result I wanted, but I think differently now, a full paradigm shift than I did when I left. I better understand how to formulate the most pertinent questions, and I can now search for pragmatic answers. His question isn't selfish or incidental. If I want to make a lasting, meaningful environmental change, I would have to be able to answer the governor's question. What is the value and benefit to them in protecting the dugongs? Okay, so this sets up for her what is essentially her perspective on her field. If you're going into environmental studies and policy, she has a new way of thinking about the issue that she had not demonstrated previously. She even phrases it as a paradigm shift. This is the kind of turn where you clearly differentiate the way you thought, the way you behaved, the way you prepared before this experience, and how you think about things after. Often people who are, especially young people who are advocating for environmental change, can come across as pretty rigid about it. And part of what this does is it bases the change on what is a real awareness and sophistication of empathy and understanding, yeah, it was frustrating, but the governor's not wrong. And so showing that kind of level, like being able to communicate a real nuanced understanding, even if you're not able to answer the question that you start with, is a satisfying answer, a more satisfying answer because it is complicated. She uses the repetition of the question very effectively. It is literally the first, and the variation of it is the last. So for the first two times, it's what is the value and benefit to us in this? And then for her final, it's what is the value and benefit? Like, I have to be able to answer that. So using this kind of like a refrain in your essay can be a very useful way of recontextualizing the same question. Every time you ask it, you understand it in a slightly different way and in a way that grows and evolves over the course of the essay. All right, I've taken quite a lot of time with that one. I hope that was worth it. Jillian, do you have any questions or points that you want to ask specifically on that one before we get to the other?
No, I just want to say that this one was very well written. And as you were reading throughout the essay, I could actually imagine the situations that she was describing, the people, the emotions. It's
The
kind of like a roller
awkwardness.
coaster. Yeah, the awkwardness, kind of like a roller coaster ride. And I feel like I want to know more about her. And I think it's just a good impression. I actually thoroughly enjoyed this one. And I'm looking forward to the second example that you're going to share.
Yeah, I do think that's true. I also think, again, I go back to the vocabulary choices. It needs to sound very polished, and some essays can come across more conversational than this one. That is a stylistic choice you could make. But I do think you want to be very particular about the vocabulary you're using and trying to create little memorable moments for your reader. This is helpful for me because I'm like a very visual person in the way that I think about things. And so having those little, like as Jillian was describing, those little kind of moments that you could easily picture, those are things that stick with the reader much longer than the literal words you're choosing. So that's why it's so important to have those little like scenes. where you're just like, you can imagine that awkward photo at the end of the meeting with the governor. That's easy to picture. So yeah, keep those in mind. What are the little moments in your essay you want them to hang on to? Think about them as like little snapshots. All right. The second one I'm going to talk about is a much more unconventional structure. I personally am a big fan of these. I like to think of them as essays that use an alternate, what I call scaffolding, that kind of frames around what is sometimes the more conventional sections of the essay. You'll see a little bit how this works as I go. It can be a shortcut to just attracting attention. Part of what this means is, again, I'm a very visual person, very visual. Part of what this means is that when you get to that part of the application, it literally looks different. If you choose this, it still has to be interesting. You can't use it as a gimmick without substance. And we're going to talk about what that means at the end or during or as we go. Your hook may catch their attention, but if it has nothing to do with the rest of your essay, it's just a waste of time and a misdirection that is more confusing than anything else. The same thing can be true for scaffolding. So if you choose one of these more imaginative, creative, unconventional structures, the relevance must still be there. All right. So the first thing you need to know, I'm going to do my best to read this out in a way that captures the visual layout well enough. And part of what that is going to mean is that I tell you when it's italicized and when it is not. All right. So it starts out in italics, first paragraph. Case file, : 54-year-old male found on a cruise ship, has stab wounds on his chest, his back to the door, and a poison-tipped dart in his neck. Probable murder. It's just, what? If you got thrown into the last one, what is happening here? It sounds like a melodrama. He's going to murder on a cruise ship. We're not reading a personal statement. We're reading an Agatha Christie novel. And she does. The next line, not in italics, it was indeed a murder, right? Which is also just great, like, tone with this. Like, you also, again, you imagine this kind of early 20th century detective, right? It was indeed a murder. And I had planned it, period. All right, there's your hook. Certainly I'm paying attention. I don't know about you, but I want to know why she's planning murders. And I think that this is a really interesting way to throw your reader into something that is completely different. And it starts with this structure of the case file. So one of the things the student is doing is using these these sections in italics as like an interjection that breaks up the way the rest of the essay moves and the kind of paragraphs she is writing more directly about herself. All right. So that's your hook. She planned a murder. Now you find out why. She continues, which you need to continue quickly if that's how you're ending it. For the past 3 years, I've spearheaded the planning of my city library's teen-led interactive murder mystery event. Audience members spend the night collecting evidence and interviewing suspects, all in an effort to find the murderer who killed our victim. All right, so you start out with this idea, this is my murder mystery, but it's also connecting to something that was probably visible in her activities list. So for her local library, she plans murder mystery, which, first of all, fun. I want to do it. I want my local library to have murder mystery nights. So immediately, you're just on board with this student. This is a cool thing to do that not everyone does, but in some ways it is a kind of activity. Like, again, it's in her activities list. It's not like this thing that is super dramatic. It's just what she does as a kind of volunteer and community contribution. All right, back to italics. Suspects, : Charles Winfrey Cunningham IV. We really are in an Agatha Christie novel. The victim's son and heir to family fortune, fond of reciting his own poetry, especially when no one asks, seems confused, tries and fails to hide collection of hand-rolled cigars, wearing flared jeans and a lime green overcoat. Wow, vivid. Scarlett Thompson, victim's assistant, aspiring social media personality. Okay, has eaten nothing since the ship set sail besides avocado toast, wearing strapless black dress and red heels. Suspicious, that's his first name. Suspicious McEvil, victim's business partner. Subtle. Wearing sunglasses indoors even though it's snowing outside, has extensive knife collection, and claims one is missing. So this is actually a lot of words dedicated in the personal statement to elaborating these three characters in this murder mystery. That's a little bit of a risk. She's spending a lot of words without talking directly about herself or her experiences. However, one of the things that comes off very clearly in her creation of these characters is some of her personality and the way she sees the world. So, some of the details she has used to create these kind of, again, these melodrama characters, right? Is the kind of details you're just like, this is someone who notices these things, who creates a character who's eaten nothing but avocado toast, who wants to be an influencer. You're just like, all of a sudden, we're starting to see a way of seeing the world that she's presenting. So she's talking technically about these other kind of characters that she's creating. But because they're her creations, we're actually learning a lot about her by inference. And she also just seems funny. She seems like the kind of person who would have interesting observations about the people around her. Then she comes out of her italics again. If I'm going to write a good mystery, I can't just think from the lens of a writer. I have to put myself in the shoes of a detective and ask myself what I would think if I were investigating. That fundamentally is the device she is using to merge the different aspects of her personal statement. Thinking like a detective. Like, what does that mean? And in one part, you have the I build murder mysteries by thinking like a detective. And as you're going to see it coming up, how does thinking like a detective shape the way I approach other things in my life that are important to me when I'm not writing murder mysteries for my local library? So she gives an example. Why is Charles confused? I begin by taking stock of the information I have and questioning it. I look for details that seem strange and try to find explanations for them. I applied the same critical eye to my summer internship. Different application or different kind of way of thinking about something else that she has done. I applied this same critical eye to my summer internship at a water and power plant, where one of my jobs was to analyze city water usage data looking for possible leaks. I looked at bill spikes and call records to determine anomalies. She's kind of playing detective in entirely different contexts. We're back to the murder mystery. I asked Mr. McEvil to take off his glasses, revealing a black eye. Sometimes a detail will give me information I can act on, a theory I can test. So the idea here is, Mr. McEvil has a black eye. I am formulating a theory. What does that look like in other contexts? Let's say the data shows a definite increase in and continuous use of water. I would conclude that there might be a leak or that something is happening unknown to the customer. So again, looking at the data, finding something small, finding some detail, and hypothesizing about it. Back to the murder mystery, back in italics. Wait, I'm on a boat, and the evidence might be tossed overboard. As helpful as details can be, sometimes in my search for proof, I need to replace my zoom lens for a wide angle and consider the bigger picture. I am, after all, doing this work so the residents in my community can save water and money. So I might call people and let them know that there's been an increase in their water usage. So what do? What's your action based on that? A knife wrapped in a red coat was fished out of the ocean next to the ship. Maybe it wasn't Mr. McEvil. Maybe it was someone else. After spending all that time caught up in my theory, I might discover evidence to the contrary. As frustrating as that can be, it's not a failure. It's crossing off a possibility. How do you respond to someone who's analyzing data if your hypothesis you prove to be untrue? And instead of getting frustrated or angry, I have opened myself to a new possibility. And maybe when I call, I learn that someone was filling their swimming pool or just forgot to turn their sprinklers off. 2 attempted murders, but not together. Eventually, however, the details will come together. All parts of the testimony will fit together and the answer will be apparent. The best mysteries, after all, only seem unsolvable. Once the solution clicks into place, it should feel inevitable. Oftentimes, reviewing data, examining patterns, and making inquiries yield results, like the rusted and broken pipe that needs to be replaced. Again, we're talking about the water and power internship. Thinking like a detective, and this is your conclusion. What is your takeaway? What is your realization from this experience, both thinking like a detective as a murder mystery writer, but also thinking like a detective with analyzing data from water and power internship? Whether I'm exercising my little gray cells reading an Agatha Christie novel, clearly inspirational. Or solving a differential equation. I am identifying a solution. And for me, it doesn't matter what the stakes are. The joy comes from the process, the mental leaps and bounds I make to ensure that all the details I found or written come together. So this is a kind of, in some ways, it's very unconventional. She is the only writer I've ever seen literally tell a murder mystery in the middle of her personal statement. I suppose it could have happened before, but it's not particularly likely. But it is common in the sense that it takes what are essentially two activities that would be visible on the student's activities list, but that are wildly different. And it throws them together and says, what is it about these two things that shows you who I am and what I care about? So ask yourself, why do I like doing this? And then ask yourself about something else. Why do I like doing this completely different other thing? And often the overlap is insightful. And that's what the student has done. She likes thinking like a detective, that this kind of logical problem solving and crossing off possibilities and reconsidering and the fun at being wrong and being led astray and trying something new. And what she's saying is that I use those qualities about myself to write these great mysteries, but those are qualities that are also really important to me as a data analyst and as a kind of engineer. You don't want to spend your personal statement just rehashing your activities list in paragraphs, but finding the things about you and the things that you love about them and showing the ways that because you are the one who is doing it, you have different approaches or unique approaches to your activities and how they communicate with each other or are similar to each other in unexpected ways can be a really effective way to use your personal statement. Part of what that does is it gives your admissions reader a way to again, thinking about your personal statement as a lens. It gives them a way to help unify your application and your persona. So this can be a really effective way to do it. And again, these are really important qualities when you're thinking about yourself. When you get your draft, ask yourself, like, what is relatable and likable about me in my story about myself? All right. I know you have questions. We want to highlight a couple of questions that I think people have asked and sent via different social media stuff.
Yes. A lot of people that actually sent messages, they sometimes ask things like, where do I even start brainstorming? What if my idea isn't unique? Can I write about something years ago? Is it bad if my essay overlaps with my resume? So, how do you usually tackle these common questions from students and parents?
Yeah. Okay. So starting with the brainstorming ahead of choosing a topic, I am a fervent believer that your personal statement should not just be a paragraph style resume. However, many students write highly effective essays, including both of the students we just talked about today, that are stories that come from activities in their resume or in their activities list. This is extremely common. What I would recommend you do as a way to help yourself brainstorm, instead of thinking about the activity, think about the experiences or stories you have during the activity. The other types of things that you should be thinking about are any unique experiences. These don't have to be activities, they can be personal experiences. They also might be hobbies. Another thing you might think about is your academic direction and pivotal or key experiences you've had related to that. Personal statements come out of anything. Anything. You want to be open both to yourself and to the stories you have to tell. And understand just because someone else was successful using one type of story, it does not mean you cannot also be successful using something different.
That was a great session. If anybody wants like a part two, we'll definitely want to bring Shannon back. Let us know in the comments below.
More chance for me to go over a link.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you, Shannon, for hanging out with us. And we hope we see you again soon.
Of course. Thank you.